Welcome to All Things Moore County, Moore County's weekly radio show highlighting the many facets of the Sandhills. That includes real estate, lifestyle, community and neighborhoods. And now, from 4 Properties, here's your host, Bill Sahadi.
Good morning and welcome to the talk show, All Things Moore County. Dorothy, July is just about behind us.
Just about.
And, you know, school is a couple of weeks away.
Not far away.
It's been a very quick summer.
Yes, it has.
We spent a lot of time this year talking about homeowner situations, trying to give the public some good information about some things that they may or may not be fully aware of. And I know last week we had Chris Rule come on and talk about home generators as we're entering into hurricane season. And more we find people are always interested in generators, especially with our power lines above ground.
Yes.
And all the tree trimming. Well, today we're going to pivot, and we're going to go back to talking about water issues, backflow systems for irrigation.
Okay.
Remember we had Chris Kelso on from Got Grass?
Yes.
And he's educated me a lot in the process of him caring for the lawns. He doesn't do landscaping, but everything is centered around irrigation when we have these hot summers.
Oh, yeah.
And really until like the last 10 days, it's been pretty dry.
It has been dry.
We have Bob Barmore is a friend. He's a broker at Coldwell Banker. He is a community activist. I know, Bob, you're working with the U.S. Kids.
Yes, sir.
Right now?
Yes, sir.
And I did not know that you also got involved in backflow prevention systems. So you become like a jack of all trades.
It happens when you have time on your hands, but a friend of mine in the HVAC system, I was talking to him one day, and I was teasing him that I was going to go to the community college and come back and work for him.
Yeah.
And he said, he goes, the better deal is go learn about backflows.
Right.
And he was seeing it all over the county that there are needs for backflow inspectors, and there's not enough people given the growth and the number of houses out there with irrigation that are required to have backflows.
Well, we, as brokers, sometimes some brokers will overlook an inspection on an irrigation system, which is also takes into account the backflow systems that they have. In order to talk about that, we have the utility superintendent here from Southern Pines, Ron East, who's going to educate us. We're going to go back to Backflow 101, and we're going to start that whole conversation this morning. Before we do, I just want to make a mention, Bob, because you and I are in the same industry. We lost one of our own last week, Jim Myrick, who is a certified appraiser and has been here in Moore County for as long as I can remember. He was an NC State graduate. He was only 74 years old. And Jim was the appraiser's appraiser. He mentored a lot of the younger appraisers who are in the business these days. And Jim was a very principled guy. The thing I liked the most about Jim was he took the drama out of the appraisal process. He was principled enough that he would just deal with the numbers and try to stay very steady and not get too emotionally involved in the values, because sometimes they were good, sometimes they were not, and they caused a lot of agita. But he was a kind of appraiser that I used to recommend to people who just wanted to have some land appraised, not that it was on the market for sale, but for their own edification. Jim was more than just a jack of all trades. He was very well respected in the community. I know a lot of the brokers in your office have used him and know him very well. 74 is not very old. So he worked right up until, I think, the last minute. I spoke to him about a month ago about an appraisal. And he always had a good. We always had good conversations, and he always explained. He set the table well, always. And as a broker, I respect that because we then have to communicate that to our clients. And anyway, Jim, his obituary appeared in the pilot, I think, as of yesterday. And so I just wanted to mention him at the get-go. Ron, you've been here in town for how long, 10 years?
Yes, sir, 10 years.
And you've been with the town of Southern Pines that whole time?
Yes, sir.
How did you get to Southern Pines in Moore County?
Well, it actually started when I was 18 years old. I joined the Air Force, which gave me my first introduction to the water wastewater industry and cross connection or backflow. And can you hear me okay?
Yes.
And traveled all around with the military, doing different things, water and wastewater wise. And eventually it came time to retire, started looking for a job. We had lived here previously.
Yep.
We were stationed at Pope and really enjoyed the area, wanted to come back. There was a job opening for a utility superintendent. I applied for it. Unfortunately, Southern Pines said, hey, come work for us. And I said, will do. So here I've been for, here in August 18th will be 10 years.
So Moore County is home to your family?
Yes.
Good for you.
Yes.
And you're from Texas originally?
Originally from Texas. My wife is a military brat. I have 4 kids. My oldest kid graduated here, went to college here. He's in the Air Force now.
Uh-huh.
So all of my kids will graduate here in Moore County.
That's great.
Yeah.
That's great. Bob, you were good enough to set this meeting up this morning. How long? You're not a native of Moore County.
No,
How long have you been here?
I bought a second home in 2001,
2001?
and I think I've been full-time about 16 years now.
Right. Well, you get your hands involved in a lot of different things in the community. And I know the U.S. Kids Tournament is going on, I think, right now, is it not?
I was at registration this morning, and I'll be returning to registration, and then I'll be at Longleaf Thursday, Friday, and Saturday.
Yeah.
So, yeah.
It's amazing the difference in Moore County from 2001 to today, how vibrant we've become as a community and how fast we're growing, almost like mind-boggling speed. Yeah.
Yeah. The challenge is to make sure we're growing better.
Right.
But that's a whole different conversation.
Well, we have periods of drought in the summers, or periods where the dust kicks up and we're looking for rain and we're hoping for rain, and a lot of people put irrigation systems in. And I remember back around 2010 or 2013 or 14, all of a sudden we were made aware of a requirement that irrigation systems needed a backflow system. And I remember the first time I heard those words, I didn't know what they were talking about. I just did not know. And I'm guessing a lot of people didn't know.
That's correct.
Well, that's my experience, because my clients get a note from the water company about you have to get this thing inspected.
Right.
Or we're going to turn your water off, or something bad's going to happen to you. I don't even know what the letter says. They call me up. They're new in town. Come help me, please. And it's literally, I have to find it. I have to show it to them. Then we have to talk about why is it here and what does it do. And I try to get into, the care and feeding. Where's the operator's manual here? What are you supposed to do, not do?
Yeah.
That's really the reason I wanted to have this conversation with Ron, because I'd like to hear it from the horse's mouth to some extent.
Yeah.
Because, like I said, the realtors, the inspectors, no one goes out of their way to point this thing out. And it's most people don't even know what's underneath that little plastic box.
That's true.
With all the new construction going on and people putting irrigation systems in, because right now a lot of builders don't put them in because of the expense, especially for the type of buyer that's moving into the area. If you look at the demographics, between 300,000 and 600,000, there's a lot of new construction. What exactly is a backflow system? And it became part of my consciousness about 10 years ago.
Right.
But prior to that, it was not.
Well, first of all, thank you for having me on. It's
Yeah,
a pleasure
thank
to
you.
be here. I'm eager to share information, answer any questions you might have regarding the technicality of the system.
Right.
So the cross connection program, or quote unquote backflow program, which most people have heard that term, it started in the 70s with the Safe Drinking Water Act, and was modified slightly in the mid 90s. I believe it was 96. And so the program has been around for a long time. When I was in Air Force, I went to tech school for it, and I got my first backflow certification in 1991. So I know it's been around that long. So it's not for lack of a need or requirement from the EPA. So it's typically just systems have either failed to enforce it over the years, or there was minimal enforcement, or for whatever reasons. And the reason it's about 10 years, because basically within the last 10 years is whenever more county utilities have started enforcing it rigorously.
Yes.
And that is a requirement. So water systems, that's what the Safe Drinking Water Act, both the federal and the state level say, is that communities or companies that own a public water system have to protect it from cross connection. And so we are responsible. The system owners and the operators in charge of operating that system have a certain amount of liability to ensure that cross-contamination doesn't happen, whether it's actual or potential. And irrigation systems, since that's where you guys are involved,
Yep.
are one of the highest threats. And so it's been seen over history. There's documented cases of irrigation systems contaminating public water systems. Therefore, it is a requirement. There are several subject matter experts. There's organizations out of Southern California that do hydraulic research. The American Water Works Association, they have publications on this. And so it is a conglomeration of all these subject matter experts that kind of say, hey, this is how a backflow program should be created and how it should be implemented and enforced.
When you talk about cross-contamination,
Yes, sir.
are you talking about cross-contamination with the sewer lines?
No, sir. No, not at all. No.
Okay.
So very rare, as a matter of fact, hardly ever, is a sewer system directly connected to a public water system.
Correct. Okay.
Yeah, that's not legal, first of all. But it is necessarily, once the water is sold to a customer and goes past their service, it is no longer under any kind of regulatory authority.
Okay.
And so we have health requirements that we have to meet, chemical, physical, biological requirements throughout the water system. So once we sell it to somebody and they send it into their irrigation system, it is no longer regulated and it is subject to contamination, particularly irrigation systems through the irrigation heads, the in-ground irrigation systems.
Are you following what he's saying?
Yes.
Cross-contamination
with what?
So
I'm being dense. I'm sorry.
No, it's fine. If I'm not explaining it, please just let me know. I'll go into detail. So there's been documented cases to where the public water system was contaminated by irrigation systems through the in-ground irrigation heads. Whenever the heads are they're not on, and the water just pools up around them, well, bacteria grows in that water pool.
Okay.
And if there is a back siphonage or a back pressure situation, that contaminated water can backflow into the public water system. I can't remember where it was. I know there was one time it was at a field house where an irrigation system actually contaminated the water plumbing in a football locker room, and all the football players got sick.
Okay.
There was another situation to where one man's irrigation didn't have a backflow preventer on it. There was a water main break or a fire, some sort of back siphonage in that irrigation water, which had bacteria in it, was pulled into the water system, and the adjacent consumers got sick.
Gotcha.
And
so that's the reason for the requirement, one of the many reasons for the requirements.
Okay. It requires a series of events
Yes.
For it to happen. I sometimes say it takes an act of God to make it occur.
Right.
But when you have so many thousands of systems, every once in a while God gets involved. I mean, it certainly can happen.
Right. What prompted you to get into the business? Because you're now a backflow inspector.
Correct.
You test. You're an assembly tester and a certifier.
I was curious about it. You know, it was something else to do with my time. It was a necessary service to the consumer.
Right.
I went to the North Carolina Rural Water Association. I thought this would be somewhat easy, but it was 40 hours of classroom work and a practical and written exam. And despite my graduate degrees, I did have to study and pay attention. It was not something that came natural to me. But,
Okay.
I go out. I had to buy a $1,200 gauge to go out and put these backflows through their process. Basically, I test them. There's at least 3 different valves that have to be tested.
Okay.
And that's really the nature of the test, to see, do they do what they're supposed to do to avoid a backflow situation?
Okay. Let's come back in the second set. I want to talk about the costs involved with putting a system in.
Yes, sir.
What the process is. We're speaking with Bob Barmore, Backflow Bob, as he's called, and Ron East, the utility superintendent from the town of Southern Pines. We'll be right back. Welcome back to our second set of All Things Moore County, speaking with Ron East, the utility superintendent of Southern Pines, and Bob Barmore, who's a backflow inspector. And we are going to get into the costs involved in putting a backflow system in. But just last week, Bob reminded me, what is it, Bob? August 15th?
August 16th.
August 16th is what?
It is National Backflow Prevention Day.
Jeez. So Dorothy was just telling me there's a website called nationaltoday.com where almost every day you can go on and see the whole calendar of events.
There's all kinds of crazy stuff on that.
I'd never heard of it.
It's amusing.
Well,
It's just amusing.
so my feeling is a lot of people don't know much about backflow systems, and they're learning it. It's like one more thing to add to their their itinerary. But last week, and this happens, Ron, all the time, I got a letter from the town, or I thought it was a town of Southern Pines, and it just said Backflow Assembly Test due. This one was at my office location.
Yes, sir. That's the initial notice. Yeah.
That's the initial notice,
Yes,
and
sir.
it says I have until August the 20th, that my system has got to be tested.
Yes, sir.
And if it's not, what happens? Am I fined?
Well, okay, I'd like to talk about the process for a second.
Yeah, let's do
So
that.
we use a company called BSI Online. They are a third-party company that we use that administers the backflow program for us. Now, we enforce it and we regulate it, but this company basically tracks all existing backflow tests for us. And so what happens is, as a courtesy, BSI will send you a letter 15 to 30 days prior to the due date. That way it gives people a little bit of a heads up and says, hey, you got a backflow test coming up. You might want to go ahead and schedule someone to come out and test it. Mm-hmm. And then they'll typically send a second letter once you are overdue. Mm-hmm. But once you're overdue, that's when the town enforcement takes over. And we have a code enforcement officer that is on staff, and she'll send out letters, official letters that are from the town. So those will be certified letters sent to either the customer, the owner, whomever we have an address for. Typically, she sends it out to multiple addresses just in case it's a tenant and not the actual owner resident. And that's when the town's enforcement starts. That's when the penalties can begin to accrue.
Okay.
So Southern Pines has, relatively speaking, low penalties. Once you go to a certain point overdue, it's a $500 fine, and then there's 2 additional 30-day notices that are sent, which incur an additional $1,000 each.
Wow.
And once we get to that third notification, the customer is subject to paying $2,500 cumulative plus service disconnection until they are in compliance.
this is all about safety issues.
Yeah, it's about public health and water system health is really what it's about.
So the town of Southern Pines has partnered with BSI because now that I look at the letterhead, it says the town of Southern Pines Cross-Connection Control Program from Worth, Illinois.
That's correct. That's where they're out of. They're out of Worth, Illinois. Yes, sir.
You said you were one of the first.
We were the
towns?
first, actually. Yeah. So once we built our ordinance and started our enforcement, we've had several stages of enforcement since the beginning. But that's one of the first things we looked at was, okay, how many more people are we going to hire? Because this is going to cost a lot to administer.
Yeah.
Well, it was cheaper for us to send it out to a third-party company, and at the time BSI was relatively small, but they came in. We took several interviews and demos from different customers that perform backflow administration. BSI was at the top of the list, and their price was very good. So it's no extra cost to the customers of Southern Pines, the citizens.
It's a web-based system, is amazingly user-friendly.
Right.
As a tester, I can access it and submit the test results in a minimum of keystrokes. And I believe even the residents have access.
They
So
do.
They
They're
can
supposed
check
to,
their
yeah.
own status.
Oh, is that right?
Yeah, so they can check the status and make sure the guy that checked it actually submitted the test.
Yeah, they can actually either check online themselves. There's an email address they can mail. There's a phone number that they can call and actually talk to an account representative.
Yes, they do.
And
They actually answer the phone.
Yeah, they will answer the phone. I don't know how large they are right now, but they've got so many more people. Matter of fact, the first lady that who was our account manager, has now been since promoted 3 times, and she's a director over her department. That's how big this company has gotten and how good they are. They're very good.
Wow.
Yeah, they're international. I like to say international. Canada, can we consider that international? Okay. So they manage utilities all across the U.S. and a few in Canada.
Well, with this letter, which I get every year, this is a disciplined overview for people. And I even noticed that on the letter for the first time that they even have a record of who did the inspection for me last year.
Yeah.
In this case, it's Keith and Company. Is it possible that there are people in Southern Pines who have an irrigation system that don't have a backflow system?
100%.
Really?
Yes, sir. Yes, sir. Just because we can't be everywhere at once.
Okay.
We have very minimal staff to enforce this, so we've taken a mostly administrative approach. There was some aggressive inspections that we performed during our second phase, which we were going out and actually looking for stuff. But, we're busy. The utility department is busy. Growth is crazy. We have
crazy.
repairs to the system.
Yeah.
And so all day, every day, we are busy. And so we are at the point now to where we feel we have a good handle on it. Are there still going to be people out there that have cross connections that need a backflow preventer? Yes, sir. And we will find those through attrition pretty much throughout the years. They will come in for a permit, and we may find them that way through a building modification, or we may be visiting a site for another reason, and we just happen to notice it. We've done that before. I drove by a house a few months ago. I saw an irrigation system come in, so I went and asked the inspectors, "Hey, do they have a permit for that?" And they were like, "No, they don't have a permit for that." And so I sent a guy out there, and they talked to the customer, and the customer was like, "Hey, you have to have a permit. By the way, you need a backflow preventer to put an irrigation in." The guy calls me. We have a conversation, kind of walk him through it. He was amenable, got it all done. Now his irrigation system's in, functioning. He has a backflow preventer in that's been tested and certified, that's functioning, and the water system is protected.
Are licensed irrigation installers required to educate the consumer about the install of a backflow prevention
I
system?
don't believe so, but I don't know 100%.
Wow. I would think that they should be, right?
They should be, but that leads me to another story. I know that a lot of plumbers are required to.
Okay.
But whether or not a plumbing license and an irrigation license, what kind of cross connection there, between those two, I really don't know. I have had a plumber. So we actually had a dental office. This is a case, if you don't mind me going off on a tangent.
By all means.
So we had a dental office
We
in
love
Southern
tangents,
Pines.
yeah.
And this is actually a case of potential cross connection. You can imagine what goes on in a dental office. They were doing dental surgeries and all kind of stuff in there. So they put in this piece of equipment without the town knowing about it. And the plumber that put it in was like, hey, you might want to let the water provider know that you're putting this in. They might have some concerns. Okay, so she pays the plumber leaves. They didn't have to call the town. There was no mandated requirement for them to call the town. But as a courtesy and a good customer and that's concerned with things like this, she gave me a call. So we talked about it, and I couldn't quite get my head wrapped around on what was being installed. So I went out there and did a site visit. Well, what it was this piece of machinery was a biofilter for the vacuum system that sucks up all the saliva and blood and chunks of bone and gum and whatever else is in there. So there were biocontaminants on this piece of equipment they put in with a direct connection to the water system. So if there had been a backflow scenario on that street, that stuff would have gotten out into the public water supply, potentially could have gotten out. So I said, okay, ma'am, this is the hazard. It's a high level of hazard since it's a health hazard. This is what we require. Within a couple months, they were in compliance.
Then they installed a backflow.
They installed a backflow preventer. They had a tester come out and test it, make sure it was working right, and they have a tester come out every year to make sure it's working, and the water system is protected.
Who installs backflow prevention systems? Irrigation installers?
No.
Bob
Plumbers,
shaking his head no.
Plumbers install them most often.
I believe you need to have a plumber's license to install a backflow device.
He's correct.
Okay.
Yeah.
Good to know. I didn't know that either.
I mean, just to clarify one of the things that Ron's talking about, a black siphonage event.
Yeah.
I mean, what is that? I mean, it's always like, well, there was a big fire down the hill, and the fire department opened up the hydrant, and all of a sudden your water pressure went to zero.
Right. Yeah.
That's when siphonage starts happening, or a water main breaks. I mean,
It's a loss of system pressure ultimately. So whenever the water mains are in the road, they're below the ground, so they're at a lower elevation than the customer. So if there's a contamination in the facility or at the point of use, and there's a loss of system pressure, gravity is going to take that contaminated water back into the water mains, and then when the water main is charged, it's going to have that contamination in it.
Gotcha. Okay. Bob, how many, in your experience, when you are working with your buyer clients and you do inspections, do you order an irrigation inspection generally?
I'll be honest with you. I mean, my two businesses are a little bit separate. I do not, and seldom, I'm not sure I would know who to call.
Okay.
I mean, I have working knowledge of irrigation systems. I assume none of them are working perfectly.
Right.
And it's one of those things, you buy it as is, and we'll fix the issues later. However, I think the requirement for a backflow device, I think should be right there with septic system.
Yeah.
In terms of it needs to be inspected. You just
point.
need to know. Because you don't want to move in and get the notice from the water company that you got 30 days or they're shutting off the water.
Yeah.
Because you have no way to know what the previous owner had done.
Yeah.
That's right.
We do order irrigation inspections with home inspections and termite and septic. We had a house I mentioned to you before in Pinehurst where the irrigation inspector eyeballed what was considered the backflow prevention system, and he said this is not up to snuff. This is not something that would pass, inspection. And so we put that request in the repair request. Sellers wouldn't do it because they lost the battle on the contract price, and that happens. But we're going to probably go back and revisit that to make sure that it is up to snuff. The gentleman who told me it was not, I have a lot of faith in. But it becomes more and more a part of, and sometimes irrigation lines over septic systems are no good, right? So you got to have those lines moved. Let's come back in the third set. Dorothy's waving at me. This conversation is happening too quickly. Ron East is the utilities superintendent for the town of Southern Pines. I have a feeling you could open your own website and you get flooded with questions from people who want to know what's going on.
Absolutely. I welcome questions because this is truly a team effort. It's a team between the water system owner, the certified backflow testers, and the customers. I
Yeah.
mean, our end goal is to protect the water system and the public health.
Yeah.
And it really is a relationship between all three of us.
Okay. Bob Barmore is also with us, and Bob is a backflow inspector. We'll be right back. Welcome back to our final set of All Things Moore County, talking with Ron East and Bob Barmore, all about backflow prevention systems and possible water contamination. I'm impressed with how you guys do your due diligence, but for all those people who are listening who don't have a backflow prevention system right now, what do they do? How do they start the process?
Well, so different utilities have different requirements, and they vary slightly. Pretty much they're the same. But call your utility provider. So there's several utility owners in Moore County, Southern Pines, Moore County,
Right.
Carolina Water through Whispering Pines.
Right.
So call your provider. First of all, learn about what the requirements are, or have a plumber or a certified backflow tester contact the utility on your behalf because they might understand the language a little better. That's the first thing I would do. And then from there, you have to work towards compliance, which means fulfilling the ordinance, fulfilling the law, making sure it's installed. Once you achieve compliance, notify the system owners, or in our case, BSI on our behalf. And then once you gain compliance, then you'll kind of be off our radar.
Can you give me a ballpark parameter on what it would cost to put in you have a half-acre lot. You got to put a backflow system in. You've got to use a licensed plumber, is what, Bob, you were saying. So any example of price that they would incur?
Well, Bob might actually be a better person to ask that because I don't purchase a lot of them.
Right.
And especially the last ones I did purchase were pre-COVID. And so, the prices of everything is crazy right now.
Right.
So especially with the copper shortage and brass. So Bob would be
Yeah, I've dealt with people that had to deal with this. And, if it's just replacing a defective device, that's or maybe $1,000.
$1,000 to install.
I mean, it's a brass piece of equipment, and it's quite expensive. The nightmare scenario is when you have to dig these trenches.
Yep.
Because they want to have separate lines for irrigation and a separate line for the house.
Right.
And when you get involved in that, it's a matter of how long's this ditch I'm digging? It can be several $1,000s.
Do most people use the same irrigation line with their house line?
They usually don't.
They usually don't.
And
Okay.
again, some of that depends on where you live, because you don't want to pay your sewer surcharge on your irrigation water.
Right.
Yeah.
So you will have 2 meters, hopefully, to avoid that upcharge on water you're using for irrigation. So you'd have 2 meters located by each other, one with a backflow device that goes to the irrigation system and one to the home.
Okay. What happens? We're in the middle of summer right now, so no issues. You've got an irrigation system. You've got a backflow system that has passed muster. What happens in November when you turn your irrigation system off, probably until March or April? Any maintenance that needs to be done to the system?
All of these devices, I say all, are usually covered by something. A fake rock, a big tan box.
That's right.
Step one is that insulated in
Okay.
any way, shape, or form? I am told, that thing's called hot box, or I think it might be the brand name, that a well-insulated hot box is probably good to about, the high teens in terms of preventing freezing, because freezing one of these systems is a good way to break one.
Gotcha.
So you've got the preventative sense there. Also, winterizing the system.
Yes.
And I provide that service to my clients. It's really depressurize the system, turn it off,
Right.
drain as much water out of it as will come out of it.
Right. So it doesn't freeze up in the winter.
Yeah.
Okay.
And then again, put the hot box back on it. The only issue is you got to come back in the springtime and redo everything and fire it up.
Okay.
But again, we really don't have winters here.
Right.
I have these interesting conversations with people who have moved down here from the north about, well, my guy up north puts the air compressor and blows everything out of it. And that's totally overkill.
Yeah.
Our ground does not freeze the way it does in Minnesota.
Right.
And I am told that applying that kind of compressed air will actually damage some of the sensitive parts of your valves in your irrigation system. But you need to think about it. At a minimum, turn it off.
Okay.
And drain as much water as you possibly can.
Okay, so somebody who needs to install a backflow system, they're looking at maybe $1,000, and they're looking at maybe $100 to $150 a year for the
annual retest.
Yes.
Yes, sir.
So having an irrigation system is an obligation to protecting the safety of the water, and there's a cost.
It is 100%. Yes, sir. It's
associated.
based on the level of hazard of every connection. So if there are no irrigation systems or no other customers that are connected that pose a threat, then a backflow is not required. It's only an identified potential threat to the public water system that would require a backflow.
So if you had a well, you wouldn't need one.
Correct.
That's correct.
Right.
As long as that line is not connected. There are some people that have a backup well.
A backup well
Yeah,
for
but
irrigation only.
No, a backup well for their house.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, and if that's connected through any means to the same piping that's connected to the public water system, because that's back pressure now, you have to have a backflow preventer.
If you have a well that services the house, you don't need to have a backflow preventer
As long as it's the only source
of water.
Nothing comes from the public water system is tied in.
But
as
if
well.
it's a backup system, then it does need a backflow preventer.
That's correct. Yes, sir.
Okay, good
Yeah,
information.
there's 100 scenarios we could talk about why you need one, but I'd like to focus on irrigation.
Okay, let me ask you a question. If somebody wants to go online and read up about these systems, where would you recommend they go?
The American Water Works Association is probably the most preeminent source of expert information. The town of Southern Pines, southernpines.net. You can go to the utilities webpage, and we actually have a couple different flyers on there regarding everything that we've talked about kind of on your show, and also some links to local testers. I think Bob's actually on that list.
Sure. He sends postcards too every year.
That's right.
That's what he told me.
What a gentleman.
He knows. Well, he's a good marketer.
Good customer service.
That's good to know. So cranking it up in the spring, or hopefully if you've done your inspections in this summer, everything should just automatically flow into the spring. Do you need to go back and check it, Bob?
That's irrigation.
Yeah.
It should work.
Yeah.
I mean, I haven't seen an irrigation system yet that, there were a sprinkler head here and there.
Yeah,
that
well, it's a
use-
mechanical device.
Yeah, use a
Anything
little bit
mechanical is subject to failure.
tweaking. But, the key thing is it didn't freeze, it didn't break.
Okay. So what you got like next week, and you're doing an inspection. What exactly are you doing during that inspection?
There are three, I don't know if there's actually redundancies, but basically three diaphragms, check valves that work in conjunction. The first one, basically, at one, if the pressure goes down to 1 psi and it fails, then the next, there's a relief valve that literally just dumps the water on the ground. That's kind of the catch-all. So if there is a back siphonage and it starts coming back, there is one control diaphragm that tries to hold it back. When that fails, it will dump on the ground. And if for some reason that one fails, there's a third one that is at a much higher PSI.
Okay.
So there's 3 levels of protection. And all I do is I have a thing that looks like a little octopus. It's a 4 valve differential gauge that I push water on both sides of these check valves to make sure they behave appropriately.
Okay. Is there any relationship between having a backflow system and water pressure?
I'm not sure I understand the question.
I'm not sure.
Not really.
Not really.
I mean, it's one of the things I actually test. I know the water pressure when I get done with the test.
Okay.
But I don't think so. I mean, if anything, I believe I've seen somewhere that, having the backflow device reduces the water pressure on the other end by like 5 psi.
Oh, is that what you're talking about?
Yeah.
Yes. Yeah. All backflow assemblies are going to reduce. There's going to be a reduction in flow and pressure across the backflow.
Okay.
Depending on the size, it could vary because all those check valves are spring loaded, so they take a certain amount of pressure to open up.
Yeah.
So the smaller ones, it's be around 6 to 10 pounds. You might see 15 to 16 pounds on very large ones like fire suppression lines and stuff like that.
Okay.
So there's always a pressure and a flow loss across it.
Okay. If people want to reach out to you directly, can they just contact you
absolutely.
on the
Absolutely.
website? Or
yeah. So you can go, my information is on that utilities page as well.
Okay.
But I'll go ahead and give out my email address is my first initial last name, RISTRE at southernpines.net. And the telephone number to our Public Works Department is 910-692-1983, and my direct extension is 6228. If you have any question regarding anything utility related in Southern Pines, please give me a call.
Okay. So I have a question.
Okay.
How does your last name, spelled RISTRE, how is that pronounced East? Because that's your last name.
It's my daddy's fault. So
That's crazy.
yeah, it's a French last name.
It's French,
It
right?
is French, yes. And so I guess the Cajun French just felt like saying that. I'm not sure why.
They took the path of least resistance.
I guess so. Yeah, it was too difficult for Americans to
Looks
say.
like
so
a
they
French
shortened
cocktail. Ristre? I don't know.
I don't
but
know
it's
either.
just East.
Yes, sir.
People are going to think they got the wrong person. They said, "Oh no, the guy's name was East."
Well,
not
I'm the only
RIS.
Ron in the building, so if they just ask for Ron, they'll get you to me.
Okay. And Bob, if people want to reach out to you now that they're getting these notices, and they want to hire you to come out and do an inspection for them, how quickly can you respond?
I mean, I pride myself in customer service. So, I mean, I literally can do same day. I will work until the sun goes down, and I work early in the morning. So if you need it, I will try to get there ASAP.
Okay.
And I run an ad in the pilot. It's usually there.
Okay.
Or my phone number is 910-528-9536.
Okay.
Just give me a ring.
Okay. Thank you. Ron, you had something else?
Yes, sir. Before we end, I would like to give a big salute to the men and women who serve Southern Pines on staff.
Yep.
From the fire department, police department, library.
Yep.
A bunch of good men and women, experts in their fields.
Yep.
Care about the community.
Yep.
And salute to all of them.
I'm glad you said that. There is a ton of pride in Southern Pines, is there not?
Yes, sir.
From the top down.
All the way.
Right.
Yes, sir.
And we always talk about clients will always ask us about what are the taxes, on a property, and whether it's Pinehurst or whether it's Aberdeen or Southern Pines, we always say that what you get for the amount of tax money that you spend is a great value because you have to base it on what are the services that are provided.
Level of service, yes, sir.
And Moore County is they're first and foremost in my mind. People get a lot of value. It's not just the number, it's what do you get.
Right.
And you're a great spokesperson for the town. I appreciate you coming in.
Well, that's kind of you to say.
It was the truth.
Well, thank you.
And Bob, it's good to see you, and I appreciate you setting this up. Everyone's got to start thinking they have to go home now. And one more thing to put on their worry list, what they have to take care of, but it's important.
Happy National Backflow Day.
There you go. This is All Things Moore County, everyone. Have a great week. Thank you.